Supernatural is probably my favorite show. You can go on about how I don't have taste or how I should watch better TV shows, and you'd probably be right, but I just love the show. Of course, part of that has to do with when I got into it. I was going through a really hard time in my life, and at some point I just sat down and binged the show to escape it all. Flash forward from 2017 to 2021, and I've seen the show multiple times now, and it honestly never gets old to me. So I figured, with the show concluded and all 15 seasons and over 300 episodes out, why not go back to the beginning and talk about the show? Last time I covered what I consider the golden age of Supernatural, seasons 1 through 5. Now, in this installment, I'll be covering what I consider to be a lower point for the show, or the Bronze Age. Today we're talking about season 6 and 7. Awesome, I finished the video and we can just get back on with my life. And so Supernatural decided to follow up its best season yet with its worst. Yeah, season 6 is not a very good season. It's definitely not awful, and I don't think I'd even really call it that bad. It's just a huge mess, and it's definitely noticeable after you've binged seasons 1 through 5. Going from the near masterpiece of season 5 to this just didn't feel right to me. The season trades the super well-paced and well-handled plotline of season 5 for a meandering and chaotically structured season that, despite its best efforts, does not come together at the very end in any way at all. It's hard to even pinpoint the main plot here through all the different threads. There's Crowley trying to break open purgatory by finding monster alphas, which I think is pretty cool. Then there's Castiel waging a civil war in heaven after the vacuum left by Michael's disappearance, also pretty cool. And then there's Sam being soulless after the events of season 5's finale, alongside their grandfather randomly being back. Soulless Sam is cool. Their grandpa is not. I guess you could argue that there is a main plot since everything kind of converges by the time the finale comes around, but it never really feels like they planned it out. Don't get me wrong, despite not being truly compelling by the end, it almost is pulled off. The reveal that Castiel was helping Crowley to try to open a portal to purgatory so that Castiel could use those souls to charge up his battle in heaven is cool, but it feels a little late, and the sudden heel turn in Castiel doesn't really work for me in the character department. Misha Collins is fantastic when he plays evil Castiel, but the writing doesn't really do the concept justice at all. It just sucks that in doing this tying together of plots, a ton of other plots feel really underutilized. I love the concept of Eve. I think a mother of all monsters is a fantastic idea, and scaling things back and going back to the basics for a season after the apocalypse was great. Unfortunately, they do nothing with her, and she's just a red herring. The only plot point that I think comes across entirely compelling is the stuff that has to do with Sam's soul. Sam is my favorite character on the show, so I do love seeing him get plots and storylines that are good for him, and for the most part this plot was great. I love the intrigue and everything they had to do with Dean slowly figuring things out. I unfortunately do think the writers dragged it on a little too long. The plot concludes in episode 11, and by then I was just kind of tired of it. It felt like less Sam without his soul and more just Sam being an asshole and just a sociopath, which I get that's what they were going for, but after a bit there's only so much you can do with that concept. Now, I will say the season does have some pretty good episodes, but all of them feel like the show is just capturing season 5's glory for a moment and never the full 22 episode season.
Nipples? Rich.
Episode 11, Appointment in Samara, is the conclusion of the Soulless Sam arc, and they bring back Death, and it's pretty cool. And episode 17, Frontierland, has them going to the Old West to gather Phoenix ashes, and it's pretty dope. And I will say that while the main story doesn't come together truly great by the end, I think the episodes that we get by the end are pretty good. Episode 20, The Man Who Would Be King, does a fantastic job at delivering a Castiel-centric episode that tries its best to tie everything together. And while I think that it's a terrible finale, episode 22, The Man Who Knew Too Much, is pretty great as an episode. I think it's a terrible finale because it doesn't really tie together or conclude any of the main plots. The only plot it concludes well is the only plot that I said was compelling earlier, which is Soulless Sam. So I'm glad that we at least got that out of the episode. Season 6 just has some bad episodes too. Episode 14, Mannequin 3, The Reckoning, is easily one of the worst episodes of the show up until this point, and it's awful. It honestly feels like it's trying to mimic a B horror movie, and if it ever comes out that that's what it was trying to do and it was trying to be campy and stupid, I'll give it a 10 out of 10 because it's a hilarious episode. But until then, it's really not good. Episode 6 has Dean turning into a vampire and Live Free or Twy Hard, and they managed to make such a batshit concept boring to me. How do you do that? How do you turn Dean into a vampire and make me not care? The entire season has some weird vibes to it from the start, and it feels like a show really lost a lot of its identity when they changed showrunners from Eric Kripke to Sera Gamble between seasons 5 and 6. There is a lot that I could talk about too. The inclusion of Sam and Dean's grandpa and extended family is easily one of the stupid things the show has ever done, and I'm so glad they all died this season. Unfortunately, Rufus also died, and that's a huge downside because he turned into a really great character here, and losing him just gutted me. I really love the dynamic between him and Bobby in an episode like Weekend at Bobby's, and then the character development he got at the end of And There Will Be None really made his death hit a lot harder. There's also the Dean, Ben, and Lisa storyline throughout the season, which I feel like is alright. I did get a little bored of it at a certain point, but it was nice to see Dean have a semblance of a home life. I just wish the story had ended a bit better than it did, because I really wasn't into the wrap-up that they gave it in the episode Let It Bleed. It just kind of felt out of nowhere. The season also just randomly introduces a bunch of other things out of nowhere, like Lovecraftian horror. Again, also in the penultimate episode. These are things that could have made the season better. Like if the villain of the season was a Lovecraftian monster, it could have been really cool, but introducing it so late into the game just was really weird to me. This season also just mad stupidly inconsistent. Sometimes we go from a horrible episode like My Heart Will Go On to a complete banger of an episode like Frontierland, and it's insane. We'd also go from Mannequin 3 The Reckoning to The French Mistake, which is one of the best episodes of the show. It's not even mediocre or bad the entire season, we just flip-flop too much to where it makes me angry thinking about it. At the end of the day, Supernatural Season 6 really just felt like a far cry from what the show used to be, and I know I've been incredibly negative here, but I don't hate this season, and I don't think it's that bad. Again, it almost comes together well at the end, but there's just too many issues for me to really dig it. I just wish we didn't have to go this downhill after season 5. The best episodes of season 6 include episode 15, The French Mistake, episode 11, Appointment in Samara, and episode 18, Frontierland. The worst episodes have to go to episode 8, All Dogs Go to Heaven, episode 17, My Heart Will Go On, and episode 14, Mannequin 3, The Reckoning. I give season 6 a 6 out of 10, a very light 6, closer to a 5 than a 7. I just think that it has enough good episodes for me to give it an extra little bump up. What the hell? Season 7. The season that a lot of people consider to be the worst. And I wouldn't go that far, trust me, we'll talk about the worst soon. But I would go as far as to say this season is definitely better than season 6. For once, it actually has a bit of storyline and a central focus, which, wow, you never really know how much you missed that till it's gone. Now, don't get me wrong, season 7 is definitely not a great season. I still think that it's probably the second worst season of the show so far, but it feels like Supernatural at its core. Its most inoffensive and mediocre core, but its core. I could see how some people would really dislike that, but I oftentimes found most episodes to be pretty good, and I thought the central narrative was strong enough. Having actual focus really helps after the Scatterbrain season 6. I think you could argue that there is a downside to that, and that's while season 6 was juggling too much and it led to the whole thing feel scatterbrained, season 7 really juggles only one plot, and it ends up feeling way too stretched out. It runs into the issue of a lot of other CW genre TV shows, and that's the issue of your season being too long for your story to maintain its consistent momentum. The Leviathans are really cool overall, but they start out way better than they end here. The story just runs out of gas around the midpoint, and I think their plan is really cool. I really love the idea of them infiltrating corporations and things like that, and you know, politicians and such, but the show never really does anything with it, and they just kind of forget about the main plot for like 10 episodes and then info dump it all in episode 20. The resolution to the plot is also a little dull. They don't even really have a big fight. They just kind of show up and stab the lead Leviathan and kill him, and that's it. They set them up to be this be-all end-all kind of conflict, and then they just destroy them. I will say the Leviathans are still cool conceptually. I love that they're kind of like little creepy like lizard dudes. I like that the season kind of has a whole like lizard people infiltrating thing conspiracy. It's pretty dope, and I think Dick Roman is a great antagonist. He's probably one of the best this show has that isn't named Lucifer or Azazel. All of the issues the Leviathan storyline runs into are a bit of a shame because I feel like the first few episodes of season 7 are incredible. There's such high stakes in these first few episodes, and I think this is probably the best opening to a season since season 4. The season premiere even feels like a better finale to season 6 than the season 6 finale that we got, because it actually feels like it wraps some things up. It's just too bad that the rest of the season ends up feeling like it's running on fumes. I said this feels like the show at its most mediocre core, and I really do mean that, especially when it comes to character arcs. Dean is fed up with the world again, Sam is struggling with himself again, and the world needs saving, and neither one of them wants to do it. Now, don't get me wrong, I like these story arcs enough here, they're pretty good, but the show never really does anything with them to make it stand out from what we've already seen and better versions of those. Dean's becoming an alcoholic, but the show never handles it with anything more than a passing mention, and while Sam's difficulties with hallucination Lucifer after having his memories from hell back is cool, I think they spend too many episodes with him just being okay or not really caring much about the fact that Lucifer is in his cockpit.
Even now?
He's singing Stairway to Heaven right now.
Good song.
Not 50 times in a row.
The plot itself, I think, ended fine enough in episode 17, The Born Again Identity, but that episode also suffers from having so much crammed into it that the resolution of this plot can't help but feel a little half-assed. Castiel just comes back from nowhere and just wishes away all of Sam's issues, and then we move on. It feels like the writers didn't really care too much to flesh the plot out, and that sucks because what we do get of it is amazing, and it's a lot of good stuff for Sam. The show also reuses things that aren't character arcs this season. We get terrible Sam and Dean drama where they split up again, and we get them in trouble with the law for the 15,000th time. Though I will say I actually do like the scale of their troubles with the law this season. Having it be like a murder spree and the FBI being involved is really cool, but I feel like they ended it a bit too quickly, even if I do like the idea of them having to ditch the Impala and change a lot of the way they work around. It's just another problem with the season's 23 episode count that it kind of feels like they needed to figure out a way to keep the momentum going, and there's not something they could have done. Bobby is a character who this season gets a ton of good and some bad. On one hand, he gets a really great death that I think feels fitting of the character and wraps him up really nicely, but on the other hand, he gets this weird ghost arc that was hit or miss. It starts really nicely, but by the end of the season, it just kind of felt stupid and like a massacre of Bobby's character at times. This season just kind of felt a little weird by the end of it as well. It introduces a ton of really dope elements, but they feel more like groundwork for season 8 than they do feel like elements that fit into season 7, and it just feels super jarring coming out of nowhere. The episode also has a ton of really not good episodes. There's like The Mentalist, which I cannot even recall at all, and then there's Of Grave Importance, which is one of the most sexist episodes of the entire show. And there's a lot more, but there's some really great episodes too. There's an episode where Dean goes back in time and has to fight a time god. There's an episode where childhood fears come to life. There's a lot of good here. There's a lot of good plot episodes too. It's just there's never enough to make me really love the season. I just kind of like it. So yeah, the Leviathan stuff is cool, if not stretched out a little bit. All of the character arcs are decent enough. I just wish they had more done to them, and I think that's the main mantra of my thoughts on season 7. It's good, but it needed a little bit more meat to me. The best episodes of the season include episode 10, Death's Door, episode 1, Meet the New Boss, and episode 20, The Girl with the Dungeons and Dragons Tattoo. The worst episodes of season 7 include episode 8, season 7, Time for a Wedding, the episode where Sam gets his bodily autonomy removed and the show treats it as a joke. There will be more of these. Episodes 19, Of Grave Importance, and episode 7, The Mentalists. I'll go ahead and give season 7 a very light 7 out of 10. It's closer to a 6 than an 8. I like it overall and I have a good time watching it, but again, it needed a lot more meat to be a pretty good season of the show. It's still easily the second worst. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the pretty decent to mediocre seasons of Supernatural run by Sera Gamble. Join me next time where I'm going to be talking about what I consider to be the dark age of Supernatural when Jeremy Carver took over as showrunner. It's a bit of a weird period because there's 2 seasons I think are really good in it, but there's 2 seasons that are easily the worst of the show for me. So I'll see you all then.